The November wind cut through the Colorado mountains like a sharpened blade, howling down the ridges with the promise of an early winter. Elias Turner pulled his worn buffalo coat tighter around his shoulders as he trudged the narrow trail home, boots crunching on the thin layer of frost. The sun hung low behind the peaks, bleeding orange light across a valley that seemed to belong only to ghosts and men too stubborn to leave them behind. His cabin waited at the bottom, one room of weathered logs and quiet determination. He'd built it with his own hands 15 years ago, back when grief had been so fresh it tasted like iron on his tongue. He'd built it for solitude, for silence, for the kind of man who had nothing left to say to the world. But that morning, he'd picked up a letter at the general store in Silver Creek, a letter that had been waiting for him 3 days. Elias didn't much like mail. It usually carried other people's business, and he'd spent a lifetime trying to stay out of that. Still, the paper now crinkled inside his pocket as if reminding him it existed. He'd only glanced at the writing, fancy loops and flourishes that didn't belong anywhere near these mountains. Now, inside his cabin, with the fire burning low and his rifle hung by the hearth, he finally tore it open. "Mr. Elias Turner," the letter began. "As per your inquiry through our mutual acquaintance, Mr. Samuel Morrison, we have arranged for a suitable governess cook to arrive at Silver Creek on the 15th of November. Miss Clara Hartley comes highly recommended. She understands the isolated nature of your residence and is prepared for the challenges of frontier living. Payment of $40 monthly, room and board as discussed." It was signed in elegant ink by one Mrs. Adelaide Peaton, Peaton Domestic Agency, Denver. Elias stared at the letter, his jaw tightening. Samuel Morrison. That fool. He'd mentioned in passing, half drunk one night, that winters were getting harder alone, that a man his age could use a hand with the cooking and wood chopping. Morrison must have thought it an invitation. He hadn't asked for a woman, least of all some Eastern, quote, governess, quote. And yet, there it was. Today was the 15th. He crumpled the letter in one hand, then smoothed it again, hating how the words pulled at something in him he didn't want to name. $40 a month. He could afford that. Years of trapping and guiding had left him with coin he didn't much use. But the idea of sharing his cabin with anyone, especially a woman, made his chest tighten. As the day wore on, he tried convincing himself she wouldn't come. No woman in her right mind would ride up a snowbound mountain to cook for a stranger. But as the sun began to sink behind the peaks, Elias found himself sweeping the spare room anyway, clearing out old gear, patching the stovepipe, even stacking extra firewood by the door. He told himself it was habit, nothing more. Then came the sound he didn't expect to hear, the distant clop of hooves on the frozen trail. Elias stepped out onto the porch, breath misting in the cold air. 2 riders were making their way up the path. One, a young local he recognized as Tom Bradley. The other was small, bundled in a heavy cloak, moving like someone who'd never ridden mountain trails before. When they reached the clearing, Tom swung down and tipped his hat. "Evenin', Mr. Turner," brought Miss Hartley up from town like she asked. Elias's eyes went to the cloaked figure dismounting carefully, one hand pressed to her middle. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like each one cost her strength she didn't have to spare. She pulled back her hood. Dark hair, neatly pinned despite the wind. Pale face. Tired eyes, the color of storm clouds. And then Elias saw it, the unmistakable swell beneath her cloak. She was with child. "You're Miss Hartley?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Mrs. Hartley," she corrected softly. "I'm a widow." Tom shifted awkwardly, already untying her luggage from the mule. "Got her things here, sir. I'd best be headin' back before dark." He glanced at the woman, then at Elias. "Trail's rough tonight." Elias nodded, dismissing him. Within moments, the boy and his horse vanished down the path, leaving only the crunch of snow and the faint sound of the wind. Elias turned to the woman. The agency said nothing about. He gestured vaguely toward her belly. "I informed Mrs. Peaton," Clara said, straightening her shoulders, though she was clearly trembling. "She assured me it would not be a problem. I don't need wages until after the baby is born. I only ask for food, shelter, and a chance to work." Her voice was calm, but beneath it he could hear exhaustion, maybe desperation. "You won't make it back down before nightfall," he said at last. "Come inside." He took her trunk from the porch and led her in. The cabin was warm, but simple. A stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, shelves of dried meat and preserves, a single bed loft above. "You'll stay in here," he said, opening the door to the small side room he'd cleaned earlier. "There's a stove. It smokes some. Meals in the main room. Privy's out back." "Thank you, Mr. Turner," he grunted, not sure what to do with her politeness. Supper's passed. "There's bread and cold meat on the shelf. Help yourself." "I can cook tomorrow," she offered quickly. "I'm a good cook, Mr. Turner. You won't regret it." "We'll see." He paused, looking at her. "What happened to your husband?" She hesitated, her face closing like a door. "He died 6 months ago." He did the math, his chest tightening again. Pregnant, alone, and traveling into the mountains to work for a stranger. Either foolish or brave or both. "Get some rest," he said gruffly, stepping back. "Work starts early." When he returned to the main room, he sat by the fire, listening to the wind beat against the cabin walls. Through the thin boards, he could hear faint movement from her room. The creak of the bed, the soft rustle of clothing being unpacked. The silence that had always comforted him now felt different. He stared into the flames, seeing faces he hadn't let himself think of in years. A laughing woman in the snow, a child's voice calling "Pa" through the pines, both gone long ago. Outside, the wind howled through the peaks. Inside, a stranger with tired gray eyes and a fragile kind of strength slept in the next room. Elias Turner sat in the firelight, staring at the door that separated them, and wondered if the mountains were about to teach him that even the coldest hearts could thaw. Morning came early and cold. Frost painted the cabin windows in white lace, and the mountain air bit hard enough to sting. Elias Turner was already up, stoking the fire, the smell of burning pine filling the room. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake her, though he told himself he only did it out of habit. He was slicing bacon when the side door opened. Clara Hartley stood there, wrapped in a plain brown dress and apron. Her dark hair was pinned up neat, her face pale, but steady. "I'll take care of that," she said softly, stepping toward the stove. "The coffee's near ready," Elias replied, not moving aside. "Pan needs to be hot before the bacon hits." She lifted an eyebrow. "I've cooked bacon before, Mr. Turner." There was no bite in her tone, just quiet confidence. Elias hesitated, then handed her the knife and stepped back. She took over like she'd done it 100 times. Steady, sure, careful not to waste emotion. Soon, the smell of sizzling bacon and coffee filled the cabin, warming more than just the air. "How many eggs?" she asked, without looking up. "3, he said, then paused. "Make it 4, you need to eat." She nodded, cracking eggs one-handed into the bowl while keeping her other hand on her lower back. Elias noticed that small, protective gesture and looked away quickly. They ate across from each other at the wooden table that had seen 15 years of one-man silence. The crackle of the fire filled the space between their quiet words. When they finished, Clara rose to clear the dishes. "I'll need to know your routine," she said as she pumped water into the wash basin. "When you take your meals, what you like to eat, and what needs doing." He shrugged. "Meals at sunup, noon, and sundown. I ain't picky, whatever keeps a man going." He hesitated, then added, "Chickens need feeding." Eggs gathered. "Smokehouse and root cellar out back. 2 goats for milk." She nodded, drying her hands. "And what would you have me do between meals?" "Whatever needs doing," he said, then, softer, "just don't overdo it." Something flickered in her tired eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or surprise that he'd noticed. "I won't." He left soon after, heading into the cold morning. Work steadied him, the sound of the axe-splitting wood, the rhythm of chores that had filled his days for years. But he found himself working closer to the cabin than usual, half listening for any sound. He told himself it was only in case she needed help. What he heard instead was singing. Soft, low, a tune without words, carrying through the crisp air like smoke. It stopped abruptly when she must have realized he could hear, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before. When he came back for the noon meal, the cabin didn't look the same. It wasn't different in any big way, but it felt different. The table was scrubbed clean. The windows no longer wore their film of dust. The air smelled faintly of soap and something warm. "Fresh bread," Clara said when he stepped inside. She was pulling a golden loaf from the oven, her face flushed from heat and effort. "I found flour and starter." It seemed wasteful not to use them. The bread was perfect, crisp on the outside, soft inside. She served it with a thick stew made from dried meat and vegetables he hadn't even realized he still had. They ate in silence again, but this time it was a comfortable quiet. "Where'd you learn to cook?" he asked finally. "My mother, mostly," she said, then hesitated. "And I kept house for a minister's family in Lawrence before I married." He nodded. "Kansas, heard that was rough country." "It was," she said simply. Her hand drifted to her belly, and the light in her eyes dimmed a little. After lunch, she began washing dishes. This time Elias helped, carrying his plate to the basin. Their hands brushed briefly when she took it from him, and she pulled back as if startled. "I can manage," she said quickly. He didn't argue, but he didn't move far either. Instead, he sat by the fire, pulling a piece of wood and his knife from the table. He tried to focus on carving, but the shape refused to come. He kept glancing up, watching her move about his cabin like she belonged there, like she'd been part of it all along. By late afternoon, he noticed she was slowing down, her hand pressed to her back more often. When she reached for a jar on a high shelf and nearly lost her balance, he was beside her before he thought about it. "Sit down," he ordered gently, guiding her to the chair by the fire. "I'm fine," she protested. "You're not," he said, steady but calm. "When's your time?" She blinked, then said quietly, 2 months, maybe a little less." 2 months, dead of winter, no doctor for miles. Elias felt a weight settle in his chest. "You got experience with birthing?" she asked, watching him. He nodded slowly. "Animals. Once, with a person." He didn't say more, but the shadows in his eyes told her enough. "I'll manage," she said softly. "Women have babies in worse places than this." "Not alone," he said. She looked up at him then, her gray eyes meeting his. "I'm not alone," she whispered. Something inside him shifted. He looked away first. That night, as snow began to fall thick and silent outside, Clara read quietly from one of his books by the fire, a collection of poetry that had belonged to his late wife. Elias whittled wood in silence, pretending not to listen as her voice traced soft rhythm over the crackling flames. Hours later, she fell asleep in the chair, the book slipping from her hands. He caught it before it hit the floor, marked her page, and set it aside. She stirred slightly, whispering in her sleep, "Good night." He almost didn't answer, but then he heard himself say, "Good night, Clara." Outside, the wind whispered through the peaks, snow burying the trail below. Inside, for the first time in 15 years, Elias Turner's cabin wasn't silent. It was alive. The next storm came hard and fast. Snow fell for 2 straight days, burying the mountains in white silence. The world outside the cabin vanished beneath drifts, leaving Elias and Clara sealed inside their small pocket of warmth and firelight. Clara moved slower now, her back aching, her body heavy with the weight of life she carried. Elias had taken to sleeping in the main room, saying it was to tend the fire, though they both knew he stayed close in case she needed him. At night, when the wind howled like wolves beyond the walls, he'd wake to hear her soft breathing and the faint rustle of her turning in the next room. It was a quiet routine, steady and simple, until one night in late January when a low groan pulled him from his half-sleep. "Elias!" Her voice came weak through the door. He was on his feet in an instant. Clara stood near the bedpost, one hand gripping it tight, her face pale and drawn. "It's starting," she whispered. He'd known it was close, but hearing the words still froze his heart. "Now?" The storm hasn't even cleared." "The baby doesn't care about storms," she said with a strained smile. Elias helped her back to bed, trying to remember everything he'd read in the old medical book he'd found in the trunk. He boiled water, tore clean sheets into strips, and did everything he could to keep his hands steady. Clara's labor stretched through the long night. She was quiet through most of it, biting down on her own sleeve when the pains hit hard, her forehead slick with sweat. Elias stayed by her side, letting her crush his hand until his knuckles ached, whispering small, clumsy words of comfort he hadn't used in years. When she cried out that she couldn't do it, he caught her chin gently and met her gaze. "Yes, you can. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You've come this far. You'll make it the rest of the way." She took a shuddering breath, then pushed again with all she had, and then a cry, small at first, then louder, strong, alive. Elias laughed, the sound breaking in his throat as he lifted the tiny, wrinkled boy into his hands. "It's a boy," he said, voice shaking. "Clara, it's a beautiful boy." Quote. She sobbed, half laughing, half crying, as Elias wrapped the baby in a blanket and placed him on her chest. The infant quieted instantly at his mother's touch. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Oh, Elias, he's perfect." Elias turned away, hiding the tears that came without permission. He busied himself cleaning, burning the soiled rags, washing his hands over and over, just to keep from feeling. But when he finally looked back, mother and child were sleeping, peaceful, safe. He sank into his chair by the fire, trembling with exhaustion and something deeper. He'd done it. They'd done it. In the middle of a storm in the heart of nowhere, life had begun again. When morning came, the world outside was untouched and pure. The storm had passed. The sky was a clear, endless blue. Inside the cabin, sunlight spilled across the bed where Clara lay with her newborn. She stirred when he approached, smiling sleepily. "You were up all night." "So were you," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted, "but happy. He's strong." "I was thinking of a name." He waited. "I'd like to call him Samuel," she said quietly, "if that's all right with you." The name hit him like a slow breath to the heart. His late son's name. "Samuel," he repeated, voice rough. "It's a good name. Strong." He reached down, brushing his hand gently over the baby's head. "Welcome home, little man." Days turned into weeks, and life settled into a rhythm. Clara healed, growing stronger. Samuel grew louder, filling the cabin with new sounds. Laughter came easier now, soft, uncertain at first, but real. One morning, Clara found Elias standing by the window, holding the baby in his arms. "He looks just like you," she teased. "He's got your eyes," Elias countered, smiling faintly. "Those gray stormy ones." Clara came beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Elias, I can't thank you enough for everything, for letting us stay, for saving us both." He turned to face her, his voice low. "You don't owe me thanks. You gave me something I thought I'd never have again, a reason to care, a reason to live." Quote. Her breath caught, but before she could reply, Samuel stirred, his small face scrunching before a cry escaped. Clara laughed softly. "He's got your timing, too." As spring began to melt the snow from the hillsides, Elias built a cradle from pine, smooth and strong. He carved a simple pattern into its headboard, a mountain beneath a rising sun. When Clara saw it, tears filled her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You made this?" Quote. He nodded, embarrassed. "Just something to keep my hands busy." She reached up, touching his cheek gently. "It's more than that, Elias. You made a home." That night, after they'd put Samuel down, Clara lingered by the fire. The flames flickered across her face, soft and golden. "Elias," she said quietly, "I thought I'd lost everything. My husband, my home, my hope. But you gave me all of it back." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in him broke open like spring thaw breaking ice. He reached for her hand. "You gave me something too, Clara. Grace." She smiled through her tears. "Then I guess we saved each other." Quote. Outside, the mountains stood silent and eternal, snow still clinging to their peaks. Inside the small cabin, the fire burned steady. A baby breathed softly in his cradle, and two broken souls sat together in peace, no longer strangers, no longer lost. They had found warmth after winter, love after sorrow, and grace after grief. And for the first time in 15 years, Elias Turner knew what it felt like to be home.